I never believed in anything supernatural. Never. I was the kind of person who needed a logical explanation for absolutely everything. Noises, wood expanding, strange sounds, pipes, cold air on the back of my neck, draft. There was always a rational answer, and I clung to it like someone clinging to a handrail in the dark. It was my way of keeping the world under control, texto. When I finally managed to move into my first house, alone living alone, just me and my kitten, I thought I was making the right move. The cat, in fact, was my only company. An incredibly affectionate little creature, one of those that rests its head on your chest just to feel your heart beating. He followed me all over the house, slept at my feet, and constantly asked to be held. It was impossible not to feel loved with him around. The house I found was old, but charming. It had that yellowish paint that reveals decades of stories kept within its walls, large windows, a low roof. It was the kind of place you look at and think, my fresh start begins here. At least that's what I kept repeating to myself. The city, on the other hand, had something different. Small, silent, with neighbors of almost uniform appearance. Most were over 60, walking slowly, observing everything with eyes that always seemed to have witnessed more than they wanted to admit. When I brought in moving boxes, I noticed some of them stopping in front of my fence for seconds that were far too long. Lingering gazes, hard expressions, a curiosity that didn't seem like simple interest. It seemed like restrained attention, almost surveillance. My cat, who was on my lap, reacted before I could. He, who never growled, never. It let out a low, strange, guttural sound and jumped out of my arms in a way that scratched my skin. He fell to the ground, ran inside the house, and disappeared down the dark hallway. Without looking at me, without hesitating, there was a lady who walked slowly along the sidewalk, so slowly that I almost thought she was going to talk to me. But she just looked around the whole house, then at me, then back at the house, and kept walking, without smiling, without waving, without doing absolutely anything. I thought it was just me being picky. Small town, suspicious people. It's normal. But things started to get strange the exact moment I opened the front door for the first time. When I crossed the threshold, I felt a sudden weight on my body. A profound weariness. Not physical, but something that descended from my shoulders to my bones. As if the house had sucked the air out of me. My thoughts became heavy, slow, and I just wanted to sit on the floor and close my eyes for a minute. It was absurd. I had just arrived. It made no sense to feel so drained. He fell to the ground, ran inside the house, and disappeared down the dark hallway, without looking at me, without hesitating. I stood there with the door open, the key still in my hand, trying to understand what had just happened. He never did that. He was always glued to me. Always. I whispered his name, hoping he would come running back, but nothing. Just silence. Despite all of that, the sudden tiredness, the frightened cat, the overly attentive neighbors, I did what any skeptical person would do. I took a deep breath and told myself it was just my imagination, just a change, just anxiety, just a new environment I was going to get used to. The following days were swallowed up by the routine of moving. I redecorated the entire house in my own way, unpacking boxes, hanging pictures, putting my books on shelves, deciding on the furniture's placement. I spent entire afternoons organizing clothes, folding towels, stuffing empty boxes into the basement. There was so much to do that I barely had time to think about the strange feeling of that first night. I ignored the deep pang in my chest, that muffled feeling that I had just made a terrible decision. I ignored the thought that tried to creep up, insistently saying that something was wrong there. Because at that moment, I needed to believe the other version. This was my new home, and this would be the beginning of my new life. And as I filled every corner of the house with my things, I began to believe that the initial discomfort had just been tiredness. That's all. It was comfortable to think that way. But one afternoon, one of those too quiet for the size of the house, something happened. I was in my room folding t-shirts on the bed when I heard a hollow, faint sound behind me. Tum. Tum tum. Tum. It seemed to come from inside the wall. Right there. Exactly where the headboard of the bed rested. I stood motionless for a few seconds, holding my breath. The sound was rhythmic, constant, almost as if someone were hammering nails into the inside of the wall. But I refused to think about it. My brain immediately went to the most logical explanation possible. A trapped animal. A rat. A nest. Something like that. Old houses have things like that. So I did what I'd always heard worked. I banged back against the wall. 3 sharp, quick bangs to scare the animal away. The hollow banging stopped instantly. The silence that followed gave me immediate relief. So immediate that I didn't question anything. I just shook my head, sighed, and continued folding the clothes as if nothing had happened. And, as was predictable for someone who insists on rationalizing everything, I completely forgot about that episode in less than an hour. But a few days later, in the early morning, the sound returned. I woke up confused, dizzy, a little lightheaded, not understanding why my eyes had opened. I looked at my phone next to the bed. 3 a.m. Exactly. Before I could think of anything, my cat, who was sleeping at my feet, woke up too. He widened his eyes, growled softly, and burrowed under the covers, as if he wanted to disappear from the world. And then I heard it. The same hollow sound. The same rhythm. Thump, 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 thump. I was so tired, so exhausted, that my body acted before my head. I sat on the bed, took a deep breath, and hit back, just as I had done during the day, hoping that the creature, whatever it was, would go away. But this time, it didn't work. The banging continued, rhythmic, constant, indifferent to what I was doing. I even tried banging harder, trying to repeat the pattern, but it was no use. The sound seemed to come from the entire wall, or from several points at the same time. I don't know. I was so dead tired that, after a while, I simply lay down, turned to my side, and left the sound there, hammering behind my head. Somehow, absurdly, I ended up falling asleep, perhaps from the accumulated exhaustion of the last few weeks, perhaps because my body gave up before my mind. Except that this didn't just happen that day. In the following early mornings, I began to notice a very clear pattern, always at 3 a.m, never 2:58, never 3:02. It was always 3, exactly, and it was always the same time. Tum, 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 tum. Initially, being the good skeptic that I am, I clung to the most obvious explanations. It's a nest. It's a trapped animal. It's the structure of the wall. I was saying this aloud to myself, just to fill the silence that followed the sound. And, since I believed it was just an animal trying to get out, whenever I woke up, I would hit it back, trying to shoo it away, as I had done that first day. But in the early morning hours, it never worked. Never. It didn't matter if I was in the master bedroom, the guest room, or on the living room sofa, which was also against the same large wall that joined half the house together. I always woke up, always at 3 a.m, always to the same hollow, rhythmic sound, pulsing from within the structure. I tried everything. Earplugs, headphones with white noise, sleeping with loud music, sleeping in another room, sleeping on the floor, sleeping curled up on the sofa. Nothing helped. Because no matter where I was inside that house, I always woke up at 3 a.m, and always hearing the same knocking. The same, without fail, without delay, without advances. It was always 3 a.m, After a few weeks, I could barely recognize myself in the mirror. Tiredness had ceased to be a nuisance and had become a permanent state of my body. I no longer knew what it was like to wake up rested. It was as if the house drained something from me, night after night, until the simple act of opening my eyes required an effort I couldn't explain. Dark circles covered almost my entire face. My skin seemed paler, thinner, almost transparent in the morning light. And the worst part is that I wasn't even waking up anymore, because from the knocks, I would wake up before of them. Always at 3 a.m, even on days when the noise was fainter, almost imperceptible. My body would wake me up seconds before the first impact on the wall. It was as if my mind had molded itself to that absurd routine, as if my biological clock had been reprogrammed by the house. I could sleep in the bedroom, on the sofa, on the floor, wrapped in blankets. It didn't matter. At 3 a.m, my eyes would open. Alone. Always. And that was killing me. At work, I mixed up names, forgot simple orders, broke glasses, and left the cash register open. One customer even asked if I was sick. My boss called me into the office twice just to ask if I was going through something. It was even worse in college. I would miss entire explanations, blink, and find myself rereading the same sentence in my notebook 5 times. My classmates started avoiding talking to me because I took a long time to respond, as if my head was a few seconds behind the rest of the world. But nothing, absolutely nothing, was changing as much as my cat. He was my emotional anchor, my relief, my peaceful haven. And little by little, he began to change. First, he became more attentive to the corners of the house. He would sit motionless in front of cracks I never looked at twice. Dark corners, behind doors, under furniture, near the base of walls. His body would stiffen, his gaze fixed, as if he were seeing something I couldn't. After that, he started avoiding being near me during the early morning hours. And then, during the day, the cat that used to sleep at my feet now seemed suspicious of the entire house. He hid behind the sofa, under the sink, inside the laundry room, his body curled up, completely bristled. Sometimes I would find him staring at the same part of the wall where the banging had happened, but always from afar as if getting close were dangerous. And something even stranger began to happen. Every time I opened the door in the morning, to get some sun or take out the trash, he would try to escape. It wasn't a curious escapade. It was a profound despair. He ran straight out into the street, away from the gate, as if every wall of the house were burning. And bringing him back was torment. I had to carry him against my body, but he trembled so much he seemed to be in shock. The extremely affectionate kitten who followed me through every room now barely accepted being picked up. His purring disappeared. His tranquility vanished. It was as if something inside the house was squeezing the life out of him, little by little. And with each passing dawn, this change only escalated. Until one particular night, I realized how much worse everything had gotten. Not just for me, but for him. I woke up as usual, even before the knocking started. And the instant I opened my eyes, my cat was already awake, on top of the bed, arched, growling at the dark hallway. The growl was so deep, so frightened, that I felt my stomach churn. And that's when it happened. The knocks rang out, dry, rhythmic, exactly the same. On the wall by the headboard of the bed, tum, 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 tum. The cat took 2 steps back, startled, as if something were approaching the room, and I froze. For some reason, that night when the cat backed away and I froze in the darkness of the hallway, my mind simply gave up on running away. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't panic. It was a kind of profound exhaustion, as if my brain had decided it was time to prove, at any cost, that he had a logical explanation. It was either that, or I would admit that I was losing control. And, driven by this desperate need to rationalize everything, I began an obsessive search inside the house. I searched everywhere for holes, behind the furniture, behind the refrigerator, under the beds, in the baseboard, in the cracks in the wood, in the wall joints. I used flashlights, tools, pushed heavy cabinets by myself, opened basement hatches, moved shelves, put my ear to every surface. I needed to find an entrance. Any entrance. A crack, a tunnel, a hole made by some animal. But I didn't find anything. The walls were smooth and closed, as if they had been sealed from the inside. There was no accumulated dust where it should have been. There was no sign of rodents, insects, or nests. Nothing that would justify any noise, much less precise rhythms at 3 a.m. This made me even more uneasy. That's why, the next morning, I looked for an exterminator. I didn't want to admit it while explaining the situation, especially since I felt ridiculous talking about the knocking, the fixed schedule, the cat growling at empty walls. But I was begging for help. The exterminator listened to everything with an almost uncomfortable calmness, as if nothing I said was strange. Upon arriving at the house, he did what professionals do: opened boxes, applied products, inspected baseboards, discreetly drilled into parts of the wall to check for possible nests. He examined every corner and assured me that if there were any animals there, they would be eliminated. The smell of the chemical filled the house for hours. And that night, for the first time since I moved in, I slept. To truly sleep. Without waking up at 3. Without banging. Without shaking the wall. I woke up with the sun streaming through the window and, for a moment, felt such a great relief that I almost cried. That's all, I thought. A technical problem. A simple anomaly. Something that could be explained. But that didn't last long. A few nights later, while I was watching a movie in the living room, wrapped in a blanket and trying to pretend my life was returning to normal, I heard a strange sound behind me. A whisper. Low. Singular. Like a word spoken with the mouth almost touching the wall. I paused the movie immediately, thinking it was some distant dialogue. But the whisper continued. Weak, but clear. As if a voice were trying to pierce through thick layers of plaster, calling out to someone. My cat was on the floor, near the sofa. The exact moment the whisper sounded again, he bristled all over, growled, and ran off into the kitchen, slipping on the floor. The sound of his panic echoed louder than the whisper. It was there that I felt, for the first time, something I had been pushing away. Irrational fear. It was hard to admit. I've always been skeptical, always searching for meaning. But nothing about it made sense. Nothing I saw, heard, or felt fit into any explanation I could accept. I tried to rationalize. I tried to take deep breaths. I tried to repeat that it was all a result of exhaustion, but the truth is I no longer knew what was real. I was living through all of that. I was hearing all of that, and I couldn't explain it. Anxiety gripped my chest as if something were squeezing me from the inside. I began to think, what if I'm going crazy? I feared that possibility more than any whisper. That same night, when I finally managed to get into bed, sleep came quickly. Not because I was calm, but because my body was exhausted beyond its limit. That's when the nightmare began. I dreamt about a man walking down the hallway of my house. The same walls, the same dim light leaking through the half-open door, the same floor that creaked under my feet during the day. He was holding something heavy in his hand. I couldn't see what. And he was chasing a woman. She was running, stumbling, scraping herself against the walls as she tried to escape. I could hear her panting breath, the sound of her desperate footsteps, the impact of the heavy object hitting some surface behind her. In the nightmare, I knew that was happening, right there, in the place where I used to sleep. The woman was screaming, The man was advancing. And then I saw, in a flash, that the hallway she was running down was the same one that connected my bedroom to the living room. I woke up with my heart racing, sweating profusely, unsure if I had actually dreamed or remembered anything. And it was at that moment that the feeling of despair took on a new form. Because even awake, even conscious, even with the nightmare still echoing in my head, I heard the whisper again. Low, slow, coming from the wall. And my cat, who was huddled at the foot of the bed, began to tremble. On the following nights, I did what anyone with a modicum of common sense would do. I tried to rationalize everything. I kept telling myself it was just old pipes expanding in the cold of the early morning, or the wind hitting the roof tiles, or some television on across the street, reverberating off the old walls. Or more likely, it was just my body begging for rest after so many exhausting days. Moving, work, college, nights interrupted at 3 a.m. I repeated it like a mantra, as if saying it aloud made it real. But after that nightmare, so vivid, so specific, so deeply rooted within my own home, something within me began to change. For the first time since I moved, I became genuinely curious about the past of that house. I had never been interested before. I always thought houses were just houses, places where people come in, live, leave dust and a story or two. Nothing supernatural, nothing mystical. But now I couldn't ignore a question that kept hammering in my head. Why was that house so cheap? Why did such a nice house, in such good condition, cost so much less than all the others in the neighborhood? I hadn't asked about that at the time of purchase. I didn't want to know. I thought I'd gotten lucky. Now I wasn't so sure anymore. And since I had already called an exterminator, already tried logic, already tried methods, I realized I was ready to give in to something I had always rejected: the idea of seeking spiritual help. In that small town, a woman was very well known for saying powerful prayers, opening paths, and cleaning houses. I had heard about her a few times at the little shop where I worked. I always thought it was superstition. Always. But back then, I was beyond the limit. I needed peace. Any peace. I went to her on a sweltering afternoon, my hands sweating profusely. I told her everything: the knocking at 3 a.m, the cat growling at empty corners, the whispers I heard in the living room, the nightmare that seemed more like a memory than a dream. She listened without interrupting, without showing surprise, without even blinking. In the end, he simply said, "I'll go there." And so it was. He entered my house with a rosary in one hand and thick incense in the other. He walked slowly through the rooms, swirling the aromatic smoke, murmuring words I didn't recognize. Sometimes he would stop in front of a wall, make the sign of the cross, close his eyes, take a deep breath, and continue on. In certain places, he repeated the prayer 3 times in a row, as if something there needed more emphasis. I watched everything silently, sitting on the sofa, hugging my knees, trying to convince myself that it had some kind of purpose, even though I didn't really believe it. When she finished, she looked at me with an expression that I tried to decipher, but I couldn't. And he simply said, "It's old-fashioned, and it doesn't like change." The phrase kept echoing in my head long after she left, but despite the inconvenience, I clung to the hope that this would have solved the problem. And on the first night, I almost believed it. I was so tired, so consumed by the weight of the last few days, that I barely laid my head on the pillow before falling asleep. I didn't hear any knocking at 3 a.m. I didn't hear any creaking. I didn't hear any whispers. Sleeping for the first time seemed possible. But that didn't last long. Very little. One night, I don't even know which one, I woke up with a strange feeling. My vision was blurry, my breathing heavy, and only when I forced myself to sit up did I realize what had woken me up. The bedroom light was on. I was absolutely certain I turned it off before going to sleep. I remember the click. I remember the room going dark. But there she was, illuminating everything, too white, too cold. Still, in an attempt to remain rational, I thought, maybe I left it on without realizing it. Exhaustion did that to me. It messed up my memories. I got up, turned off the light, and went back to bed. This time, I turned my back to the door, pulled the blanket up to my shoulder, and tried to close my eyes. There wasn't enough time, I heard. One click, the sound of the door latch turning, alone. Too subtle to be a coincidence. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't have the courage to turn around. I couldn't even move. And then the door began to open, millimeter by millimeter. Slowly. The wood emitted a long, creaking sound, the kind that shouldn't happen with the door I had greased just a few days before. It was a sound, pressed, as if someone were pushing with their fingertips, slowly, just to see how far they could open it. My heart raced, and for the first time I thought, with absolute clarity, someone broke into my house. Panic paralyzed me. I didn't know whether I should scream, get up, run, or pretend to be asleep. That's when I heard another sound, a sharp meow, strangled, full of terror. My cat ran off in desperation and burrowed under the bed, trembling so much I could feel the mattress vibrate. And it was at that exact moment, with the door creaking slowly behind me, the light off, my cat hiding, and my mind begging for an explanation, that the phrase I had denied for weeks finally formed in my head. That house wasn't just noisy. That house was haunted. I wanted to say that it all started when I moved here. I wanted to believe in this comfortable narrative, where there is a day one, a trigger, a logical event that set everything off. But the more time passes, if time even passes in here, the more I realize that there is no beginning. There is only one way back. I wake up. I am alive. I'm slowly going crazy. And I return. Always at 3 a.m. Always to the beat of the drums. My heart is always racing, as if I were running away from something I can't see. And lately, something terrible has become too clear to ignore. That dream was not just a dream. That woman, running through the corridors, stumbling, bleeding, scraping against the walls, staring back with wide eyes. It was me, not me right now, not me in this body, but I'm from another life, from another era, from a time so distant that it should have already dissolved into dust. The man behind her, behind me, was holding something heavy. The same rhythm of the object hitting the floor is the same rhythm that echoes behind my walls today. Goal, tum-tum, goal. No matter how hard I try to deny it, that's how I died. Centuries ago. Inside this house, in the same hallway, at 3 a.m. And since that death, something has trapped my soul inside. The house swallowed me whole. It shaped me. He rewrote it for me. And every time the world changes, every time time moves forward, she calls me back. I am reborn in another body, under a different name, another face, another story, and without memory. But inevitably, I come across this house. I am drawn to her without realizing it. Within. I'm settling in. And the cycle begins again. Always the same. Almost the same. I always wake up at 3 a.m. I always hear the beats. I always dream about my own death. I always feel like I've already lived through all of this. And I always forget the essential thing. The reason why. How. The beginning. The house. It never falls down. It is never destroyed. It never disappears. Throughout the centuries, and I feel each century as a cold shadow behind me. She remains. Somehow. In a way that defies all logic, and I remain as well. Taken. Displaced. Retracing a path I've walked countless times without ever reaching the exit. Sometimes I get the feeling that I almost understand. I almost remember something. I almost touched on the answer. But it's always in almost that the cycle closes. The other day, if the days really are different here, I placed my hand on the wall and felt a slight tremor, like a pulse, as if the house were alive, as if it recognized me, as if it were saying, "You again." And I realize, with increasing clarity, that she doesn't want explanations. He doesn't want conclusions. He doesn't want me to understand. She just wants me to stay. That I wake up at 3 in the morning. Let me hear the beats. May I relive what I have lived. May I die as I died, and may it all happen again, and again, and again. For me, eternity is not infinite space. It's like repeating the same steps inside a narrow corridor. It's like hearing the same sound behind the same wall. It's about never remembering the beginning, and never reach the end. In this life, my name is Amanda. Next time, maybe a different name. Another face, another destination that will end right here. Because it doesn't matter who I am. It's always me. Always face. I always wake up at 3 in the morning. And as I write this, I feel like I'm going to forget everything again soon. The beats begin. Goal. Tum-tum. Goal. They always start. And I always wake up. Because this house doesn't need to physically confine me. She holds me captive to who I am. And I know, with a certainty that shouldn't exist, that it will never end. Never.